Welcome to the space between, a place to pause, reflect, and find meaning in life's quieter moments. I'm Julie, and thank you for spending this time with me. There are moments in life when everything changes. Not gradually, not over months or years, but in a single moment. A phone call, a diagnosis, the loss of someone you love, or an unexpected opportunity. Or, as it was for me, a car accident. Back in 2006, I thought I knew what my future looked like. I was running my own business. Life was busy. I loved what I was doing. I was planning tomorrow before today had ever finished. I was also really fit. I just completed the Connemara half marathon. Looking back now, I smile at the thought that I believe that was my greatest physical challenge. And, the Connemara half marathon is a great physical challenge. But little did I know, I'd another marathon ahead of me. The toughest marathon I'd ever run. Not on a road, but through recovery. In the months after the accident, all the medics believed that I had severe soft tissue damage. So I did what I'd always done. I worked hard, I pushed through. I kept telling myself that if I just tried a little harder, I'd soon be back to normal. Weeks became months, months became years. Every morning I woke believing today it'll be different. And every evening I realised nothing had changed. Eventually I got the right diagnosis. I'd actually sustained a neurological injury caused by the head trauma. Oddly enough, looking back, the diagnosis wasn't actually the hardest part. The hardest part was that I had become lost. I'd become so wrapped up in hospital treatments, pain management, and trying to fix myself, and that I'd forgotten who I was. Then one day, my very close friend said something I'll never forget. He looked at me as I ranted on about my injuries. Then he looked at the clock and smiled and said, "Julie, you've got 5 more minutes to be a victim." This was one of the greatest gifts anyone has ever given me. Because in that moment, I realised I still had a choice. I didn't choose what had happened, but I could choose how I responded. Would I allow my injury to become my identity? Or could I begin creating a new chapter? Shortly after that, I did something that probably made absolutely no sense to anybody else. I went out and bought myself a brand new pair of marathon runners. And I'll never forget the assistant in the sports shop. She smiled kindly and said, "These are really for marathon runners, love. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with a walking shoe." She was being kind, and to be honest, she wasn't wrong. At that stage, I wasn't looking much like a marathon runner. But I bought them anyway. Because it wasn't really about the shoes. It was about belief, faith, hope. Sometimes I'd put on my marathon runners. I'd stand quietly and close my eyes and imagine crossing the finish line of the London Marathon. Not just seeing the finish line, but feeling it. Feeling the relief, feeling the joy, feeling the gratitude. Now, if anybody had walked into the room, they probably would have thought I'd completely lost the plot, and perhaps I had. Or perhaps I was simply beginning again. Around the same time, my late sister Mary arrived one afternoon carrying a DVD. She simply said, "Julie, I think you should watch this." The film explored ideas about healing, hope, and the amazing connection between our thoughts, our emotions, and our bodies. I didn't understand all of the science, but that wasn't really the point. What it gave me was permission. Permission to believe that recovery was still possible. One part of the film spoke about how the words we speak to ourselves matter. It made me stop and reflect. Until then, most of my conversations with myself had been about everything I couldn't do. Slowly, I began changing those conversations. I started to speak to myself with kindness, with encouragement, with belief. Not because I knew it would work, but because I realized I'd nothing to lose and everything to gain. Almost everyone around me gently encouraged me to accept my diagnosis, to accept that this was simply my new life. And I understood why they said it. They cared about me. But somewhere deep inside, there was another voice, a quiet, gentle, persistent voice that kept whispering, "One day, Julie, you'll run that marathon." I didn't know if that voice was right, but I decided to trust it. Years passed. Recovery wasn't quick. It wasn't straightforward. It certainly wasn't perfect. But every day I chose hope and belief in my dream. One idea, one decision, one small step at a time. And then, in 2015, I stood on the start line of the London Marathon. The marathon I'd imagined so many times. The marathon I'd crossed in my mind hundreds of times. When I finally crossed the real finish line, it felt strangely familiar. Not because it was easy, but because I'd already lived that moment in my heart for years. The finish line wasn't really the miracle. The miracle was the journey that had brought me there. The choice to keep believing long before there was any evidence to believe. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, take good care of yourself. Julie.